Marhaba and welcome to Free Palestine Pod, the podcast. I'm Lama Bazari.
And I'm Dima Khalidi. Each week, we will bring you in-depth commentary from Palestine.
Let's talk Palestine. Today on the show, we welcome Palestinian American lawyer Dima Khalidi, who is the founder and director of Palestine Legal, an independent organization that provides legal advice, advocacy, litigation support, and dedicated to protecting the civil and constitutional rights of college students and grassroots activists within the U.S., who speak out for Palestinian freedom by challenging efforts to threaten and legally bully activists into silence and inaction. Marhaba Dima, and welcome to Free Palestine Pod. Let's talk Palestine.
Ahlan, great to be with you.
Dima, can you share with us your background, your Palestinian background, please, and how and why Palestine Legal was established?
Yes, I'm Palestinian. My father's family is from Jerusalem. My mother's family is from Jaffa originally. And, three of my four grandparents were born in Palestine and weren't able to return after 1948. I was born in Lebanon in 1979 during the Civil War, and we had to leave in 1983 during the Israeli invasion. And that's when I came to the States, and I grew up here mainly. So, Palestine has been at the center of my life and identity since I can remember. It has always been integral in my family. My father teaches Middle East history and speaks a lot about the issue and writes about the issue. And, I studied Middle East history in college before, going down the legal path. And, I went to law school really wanting to do something for the struggle and to make a difference for Palestinians in general. And I originally thought international law might be the way to do that, and found that felt limiting because of the limitations of international law. So after some conversations with activists, with lawyers, and with encouragement from some mentors of mine at the Center for Constitutional Rights, we founded this organization, Palestine Legal, to support activists in the US who are constantly, relentlessly attacked for speaking out for Palestinian rights. And there was such a need for it because there are a couple of things here, right? The United States obviously is the biggest backer of Israel in terms of military aid, in terms of political backing. If we can't change the terms of the debate here in the US, if we can't change policies on Israel-Palestine in the US, it's going to be really hard to see any change on the ground. So that's why it felt really important to protect what was a growing movement for Palestinian rights in the US from this increasing attack that we were seeing. There were more and more legal cases, litigation against boycott, divestment, sanctions activists, more discrimination complaints against student activists. So we were seeing this increase in legal attacks. And that was really why Palestine Legal got started, to really challenge these attacks that we were seeing.
And we are so grateful. I wish that when I was in college, we had a Pal Legal, because we had so many issues in the Capitol with the General Union of Palestinian Students. It was like non-stop. Let's talk about your father, Rashid Khalidi, who everyone knows is a world-renowned author and professor and has the Edward Said Chair, so to speak, at Columbia University today in Arab Studies, and was actually born the year of the Nakba in New York. What was it like growing up as the daughter of such a famous intellectual activist?
We're still all in his shadow a little bit, but it really equipped me with not only knowledge about our cause, because it was a constant topic of discussion. My father spoke to the media a lot. We Our dinner tables were always lively with debate and discussion and guests. And so it equipped me with the kind of context and knowledge, but also relationships and an understanding of what it means to be Palestinian in the US. There's a constant misunderstanding and demonization of Palestinians and of our struggle. And I saw that firsthand, and I saw the kinds of attacks that people who speak out on the issue face. My father received death threats at times, and was attacked constantly for being outspoken on the issue. So in that sense, it really gave me a firsthand view of the kind of vitriol there is, the anti-Palestinian racism that is deeply ingrained in the U.S.
And I can imagine all the challenges that your organization faces on multiple fronts. I mean, you've got IHRA, anti-Semitism, BDS. Can you elaborate on these challenges and also vis-a-vis the Palestinian exception when it comes to free speech and right to boycott?
Absolutely. I mean, this is what we do, where there are several ways that the Palestine movement in the U.S. is being targeted. A couple of those include what has now proliferated around the country, laws that punish boycotts for Palestinian rights. There's legislation in over 34 states now that in some way or another punishes boycotts. And these laws have also become templates to attack boycotts for other social justice issues. So, that you replace Palestine and you put in, you can't contract with the state if you boycott the fossil fuel industry or if you boycott the gun industry. So we're seeing these same laws that initially targeted Palestine boycotts for Palestinian rights, now targeting boycotts of other kinds. And so, this legislative assault has really happened over since 2014. We've been tracking and analyzing and opposing this legislation on the state level as well as the federal level. And it just shows the extent to which our lawmakers are co-opted into legislating against our movement. And we've seen that these impetus for this legislation is coming directly from Israel, from Israeli officials who are telling U.S. governors, issue this executive order, and telling lawmakers, we want you to pass these anti-boycott laws, as well as from a number of Israel advocacy groups in the U.S. who are actively pushing these laws, as well as Christian Zionist groups who are very much in favor. So that's one tactic that has been used. That's a kind of top-down strategy to shut down what is a growing movement for boycott, divestment, and sanctions since 2005. The other kind of center of a lot of repression that we're seeing is campuses. And that manifests in different ways. But, because campuses have become the epicenter of organizing around Palestine, the student movement is really robust. There are, over 200 student groups that are focused on organizing around Palestine and across movements. Zionist organizations have really focused their attacks on the student movement. And that includes really, we've been fighting this since Palestine Legal started in 2012, but discrimination complaints, claims that Palestine activism causes an anti-Semitic environment on campuses. So it's trying to distort and abuse civil rights laws to claim that that Palestine activism is anti-Semitic in effect. And so we have, been pushing back against these kinds of complaints, and we're able to succeed in getting several complaints dismissed in the early years. Since then, we had Trump, we had Trump's appointees in the Department of Education where these complaints are adjudicated. And we've had this push to codify a definition of anti-Semitism, now known as the IHRA that you mentioned, in effect defines basically any criticism of Israel as anti-Semitic. It says if there's a double standard against Israel, it's anti-Semitic. If you call Israel a racist endeavor, it's anti-Semitic. So imagine it can really be used and has been used very widely to target and to label and to smear advocacy for Palestinian rights in this way. So, we're seeing a renewed effort to complain, to issue complaints of anti-Semitism against students on campuses. And one of the things that we're doing is to really show how these kinds of attacks are causing an anti-Palestinian environment, actually, and how the IHRA itself is an anti-Palestinian tool. It's really grounded in the attempt to erase Palestinians, to erase their claim, their demands for self-determination in their own land. So this is a critical narrative battle that's happening right now to really define not just anti-Semitism, but what is Zionism, right? And how does that affect us as Palestinians? How have we lived and experienced Zionism? And what does it mean to be Palestinian and those experiences? So those are some of the things we're seeing. And I mean, the other big thing really is the kind of vicious personal attacks that have become, the everyday tactic of Zionist groups. There are several groups now, online sites, often anonymous, that are attacking individuals, usually students, mostly Palestinian, Arab, Muslim, people of color, and labeling them as either, supportive of terrorism or anti-Semitic. So these kinds of sites, these kinds of bullying, online bullying sites are really affecting people's ability. Their intent is to really scare people, intimidate people into silence, right? And kind of make examples out of folks. And they do things like, call on people's universities or employers or even law enforcement to investigate people just because of things they've said on social media or something their organizing work around Palestine. So this is another big threat and tactic to the movement and to just normal people out there who sympathize with Palestinians and want to say something about it. So that's just a few of the kinds of challenges we see.
We recently heard from Rabbi Rosen that, in fact, the new IHRA definition in the United States of anti-Semitism, actually being Palestinian makes you anti-Semitic. So our actual being, like just being Palestinians, as the three of us are, inherently makes us anti-Semitic. That's how far the new definition has gone, even beyond the mere criticism of the state of Israel. And this is super, super problematic, as we all, the three of us, know. But in light of that, we would love to hear about some of your most egregious cases that you've had representing activists, Palestinian activists in the United States these days.
Yeah, I think, the stories really bring life to the repression that's happening and make it real. One of the cases that resonates most with me, and we represented Ahmed Dar-ad-Dik, who was a student at Florida State University, and he was the first Palestinian to be elected president of the Student Senate there. And he is a really bright, dynamic, charismatic young man. And, he was elected to this position, and immediately he faced a barrage of attacks. His social media was scoured years back. A post of, that he had put up from just a year or two before, during a visit to Palestine, that strongly in strong words, decried the occupation, was kind of brought up, and folks were saying, this makes him unfit to be a student senate president. And, he did a video and he explained his experience as a Palestinian. He himself had lived and grown up in the occupied West Bank and experienced all kinds of violence, Israeli violence. Even after that recording, after explaining his experiences and his perception, the attacks continued and were intensified. To the point where there were Israel-backed apps that were telling people, write the university and tell them to get rid of Ahmed Daradi. So the university was hearing from people from all over the world who, had nothing to do with the university, knew nothing about the issue. And this is a common tactic as well, this generating this opposition from, outside of the particular context that we're talking about. There were city councils in Florida that issued resolutions calling on the university to punish Ahmed. The university itself, the president called him anti-Semitic. There were, student government efforts within student government to get him out of his position. So this persisted for months and months. And you can imagine the kind of impact it had on Ahmed, who, was genuinely trying to show and explain what being Palestinian meant and defending himself against these horrific attacks. So that's one case, and we continue to represent Ahmed. We filed a discrimination complaint on his behalf with the Department of Education, again, showing like this is actually anti-Palestinian environment. He, as a Palestinian, he can't speak about the issue without being attacked. And, it's an example of also the targeting of leaders, of student leaders. We've seen many such cases recently where there's a special focus on people who have influence and who are in positions of leadership being targeted. And so, Ahmed is resilient, and it continues to really fight for his, for the kind of justice that he deserves after experiencing that, and the kind of trauma that resulted. This was in the midst of COVID. His family and he himself were, sick, and the FEMA director of Florida was chiming in, when COVID was raging in Florida, and chiming in and saying, get rid of Ahmed Daradi. It's just kind of baffling the kind of attention that this case got from politicians and from Israeli funded apps and things like that. So.
Can you highlight any milestone or key successes that you've had in recent years?
Yeah, I mean, we have had many successes. I think a lot of our victories aren't, necessarily in the courts or big public victories. Every day we have victories in, supporting individuals through the kinds of traumatic attacks that they're experiencing, and building the resilience of the movement to withstand the kind of targeting that's happening. But we've had many victories working with coalitions in different states, actually pushing back against anti-boycott and IHRA legislation. A coalition in Virginia recently managed to defeat an anti-boycott bill in that state. Where we're pushed back against such legislation in many places. So even though it's easy to say, 34 states have these laws, it doesn't account for the hundreds of bills that we've supported coalitions in defeating. We've also had wins in the courts. We intervened in a lawsuit against UCLA, kind of serial litigator, a Zionist operative, so to speak, filed a lawsuit against the University of California, LA, and Los Angeles, because the National Students for Justice in Palestine held a conference there in 2018. And that conference was mercilessly attacked. The LA City Council members were, saying, "Oh, these are terrorists meeting inside," and so this guy filed a FOIA request, a public records request, asking for the names of the speakers at this conference, and it was a private conference. The NSJP paid to have the conference there. It was not a public conference. UCLA pushed back. They didn't do so, and then he sued them to get those names. And we intervened on behalf of a number of those speakers, saying that, explaining really this climate of harassment and targeting that I mentioned, all of the anonymous cyberbullying sites and the kinds of attacks that people regularly face for their activism. And we argued for this information to be kept private. And the judge agreed and recognized this climate of harassment that movement actors face, and reaffirmed their right to privacy and to peacefully assemble and associate without these kinds of attacks. So that's one example of a case that we actually litigated in court. We also won and then ultimately, unfortunately, lost a case in court against Fordham University. They banned an SJP chapter from forming, and we advocated with them for over a year, as they were trying to organize their SJP chapter. And, ultimately we sued the university and said, this is a private university. It's not a First Amendment issue, but that they, in effect, violated their own rules, their own policies, free speech policies. And, the court in New York agreed with us, and the university was forced to instate SJP as a chapter, and they organized successfully for over a year. It was appealed and appealed again. And unfortunately, the appeals court reversed the lower court's decision. And even after a year of these students organizing and showing that they were, a legitimate student group, and were there were a lot of students who were interested and involved, the university was allowed to then reban them. But, I think that these kinds of cases really show that victories don't need to happen necessarily in the courts, or a victory or a loss isn't the be all end all, right? Often we win and then we lose, and often we lose, but there are victories in other ways. And in this case, the victory was really the organizing that happened alongside the litigation. And students at Fordham University continued to organize despite not being able to do so under an SJP banner, and it brought a lot of attention and support from not only faculty but also community groups and things like that to the case. So that's the kind of lawyering that we do, right? We're not just there for the courts to bring issues to the courts. We're there to stand by activists all along the way, and to really bring the issue into the public eye, and to advocate for the goals of the movement ultimately. So that's our approach, a kind of movement lawyering approach, so to speak.
Just a question about the Fordham case. Who filed the appeals? Who filed them? Was it Fordham University? Who paid for the appeals? I'm sure that is so questionable. I mean, I would advise every Palestinian not to attend Fordham until.
Yeah. And there were.
I mean, that's the other thing. Why do we need to be in these colonial Zionist institutions? I recently had a project that was thrown out of Eton College, where Balfour himself, the belly of the beast, where he actually studied in 1861. And they canceled it last minute. Like, we were literally all flying to London for the event, and they canceled it last minute, claiming that, I was a terrorist and Roger Waters is anti-Semitic and all these other things. And I mean, it's outrageous. Who called who at Eton College or at Fordham and decided to pay for these lawsuits and get these events canceled and start calling people, all these outrageous, all this propaganda. I mean, it's amazing. It's like, I'd like to be, if there's another appeal, I'd like to be present, let's just say.
Yeah, I mean, we know that there was a lot of pressure on the university from, internally and externally from, pro-Israel groups and Zionists within the university. And that's a reality. Our institutions are, more and more, especially with the growing corporatization of universities, they are really vulnerable, susceptible to pressure from donors and from politicians and from bad publicity, right? So often, our work to bring these issues into the media will more successes because institutions like universities hate bad publicity, and they're often responsive to that even more than legal threats. So that's a big part of what we do. And unfortunately, Fordham couldn't be shamed. I mean, it's really a shameful thing that they did.
But they can be shamed. Fordham can be shamed. I mean, it's a matter of contacting every news agency and getting the right one to pick it up. But I mean, they should be shamed. And I would even argue to any non-white individual in the United States to not even consider studying at Fordham for that matter. I mean, of course they can be shamed. And that's what we don't do. That's where I feel as Palestinians and as activists and as lawyers even, we are very weak to defend ourselves. And, hearing earlier about Ahmed at UCL, I had a very similar situation multiple times throughout my studies, but in law school, when I won, president of the Law School Society, and they accused me of performing a coup on the organization. And I was like, fine, let's do it again. A week later, we had elections again, and I even lobbied harder and I won again. And then they told me, you are not allowed to treat the issue of Palestine during your tenure in law school. And I mean, this is disgusting. And even, in undergrad, I had so many disgusting events like this happen, but we're so afraid and paranoid as Palestinians. We're just so afraid. We're so lucky to be in these white colonial, Zionist institutions, when actually we should not be attending these institutions and we should be fighting for our rights and we should scream and shout, I really feel, as much as possible when any of these, egregious situations happen. And it's daily with the Palestinians. And these institutions, these universities, this is embarrassing to the education system in the United States. I mean, I think we should bring them all down,
Yeah.
But on that note, Dima,
yeah, sure.
Our question to you as Palestinians in the diaspora and as activists, what can we do to aid and abet Palestine Legal? How can we help you? Why call upon us, the professionals that are, Lama is the top, businesswoman in the Middle East, and I'm just an attorney and a lobbyist, but call upon us and let us know, let our viewers also know what we can do to help you and to help these people who are these Palestinian Americans who are going through these extremely egregious situations and being targeted and pinpointed by whether it's an institution or their job or their university, whatever, what have you be. But we'd love to help. Let us know what we can do.
Yeah, absolutely. There are a lot of ways to be involved. First and foremost, I think, we exist so that people don't have to be afraid to speak out. And so I think that's the first thing. Don't be afraid to speak out. We have your back, for anyone out there who wants to be public in their support for Palestinian rights. We know from the Gallup poll that more and more people, especially young people, young Democrats, are, increasingly for Palestinian rights. And yet there is so much fear around speaking out because of what I'm talking about, what we're talking about here, the kinds of attacks that happen. So I think we have to shed this fear. We have to be bold and courageous in our advocacy, not just for Palestinian rights, but for all justice issues, right? They are connected. We have to be consistent in our advocacy for justice across the board, for racial justice, for immigration justice, for indigenous justice, environmental justice. Second, what you just said, Lina, we we have to amplify not only the outrage, but also the support for our people. And so when you hear about something happening, of course, we all heard about Kenneth Roth being denied a position at Harvard, right? And he was able to mobilize a massive outpouring of support and was reinstated. But we don't hear as much about, the everyday student or professor who faces the same kind of backlash and, sometimes suffers silently, sometimes come to us and we try to make a big fuss about it. We mobilize people, we, have action alerts, making sure that the university or whatever institution is hearing the demands. So, when you hear about that, speak up, write to the university, write to the paper that is reporting on it, show your support and your outrage and demand different. So I think that's another thing. And, I would encourage people to sign up to our email list and really keep up to date on what's going on, the regular activities and cases that we're working on. And there are many, groups in the US and beyond that are supporting the movement as well, and part of the movement. So the Youth Campaign for Palestinian Rights, the Jewish Voice for Peace, a lot of Palestinian community-centered groups like Palestinian Youth Movement, et cetera. So I think it's really important to be aware of, the what's happening on a day-to-day basis and to speak up about that as well. For Palestine Legal, if you're an attorney, we'd love to be in touch with you. We collaborate with attorneys around the country in different issue areas, different areas of expertise. We often consult with or refer cases to or co-counsel with different attorneys. So definitely get in touch if you're an attorney and want to, volunteer your services. And that's the case for others as well. We're all, we need support in all kinds of capacities. And, of course, we are a nonprofit, so we rely on individuals to fund this work. We're a staff of 11 now across the country. We have several lawyers and other communications and advocacy and support staff. So, we need your help too to keep this work going. So we always appreciate financial support. And, our website, PalestineLegal.org, has other information and ways to support as well. So I encourage you to check that out.
No, and I think it's important that Palestinians in the diaspora, that they contribute to nonprofits like yours. It's so important because this is going to have such an influence and an impact on the future of Palestinians and Palestinian students and Palestinian activists. There is nothing that we could invest in today that is more important than our legal rights in America. I truly believe that. And Lama and I are 100% behind you. And, we are here and we will encourage people to donate to really such a worthy and noble cause, in my opinion.
Thank you both. I really appreciate that. And, there are so many needs, and obviously our people back home are in such need, and, and we have to invest in all the places where, we know we can make a difference. And that includes here and supporting and protecting and really bolstering our rights and also our narrative and our existence, because that is really the intent of Israel itself, to erase us, to get rid of us, but also of the repression machine. It's really trying to criminalize and erase us as well. And we resist that erasure every day. So I appreciate your support so much.
And in your views, where do you see the future of Palestinian solidarity movement is headed in the US?
That's a good question. I think it's, it's really defied all the pressure and the repression. I think just even since I started Palestine Legal, I don't think we could have imagined the kind of repression that we're talking about today, the level, right? The fact that our governments are, actively legislating and criminalizing our movement. And the movement has defied this in ways that I think are pretty amazing. The boycott movement has continued to grow, and so have other groups and efforts that are really mobilizing the youth. I think the youth are the biggest hope that we have for not only the future of movement, but for the future of Palestine. And there is a kind of bolder and more unapologetic organizing than I think we've seen in a very long time, if not ever. So in that sense, I think that is the biggest hope, is that, this young generation of activists who are, steeped in Palestinian history and organizing for Palestinian rights, and who also understand the broader context of injustices in the US and beyond internationally, of colonialism and racism and all of the forces at work that have made Israel possible. This generation, I think, will lead us, inshallah, to freedom and liberation ultimately. But it's not going to happen tomorrow. And I think we're seeing in Israel, in the Israeli government, the most fascist government ever, more settler violence than ever, and there's the costs are going to be very high. And I think people here in the US and really globally are continue to mobilize and to organize and to change minds. And I think that's happening. It's slow, but it's happening. There are shifts that we're seeing that are really important. Not just at the grassroots, but that are starting to filter up into the grass tops, into, there are those handful of elected officials who are, standing strong in support of Palestinian rights. And I think that number will grow and will continue to make strides in these different arenas. But, it really does take working in so many different arenas to push this movement forward. And I think that's something that our opposition has done really well. They work in government, they work in the legal and business and all kinds of professional arenas. And, we have a long way to go, but I think we're building power in unprecedented ways. And I'm really hopeful about that.
And I mean, I think if we want to call it the opposition, for lack of a better word, but I think the other thing is that they're also, they're extremely well organized, and they've invested so much into their kind of false, history of Israel. And so it's almost as if Gen Z, I feel like the future is in Gen Z, but it's almost as if Gen Z kind of sees through it. And then the Jewish American liberal communities that even maybe 40 years ago were much more neutral and then became very Zionist are now kind of turning back and realizing that they had in fact been hijacked by Zionism in the United States. I see these kind of we feel like there's these type of trends. And then of course, like we were just discussing, Bernie Sanders, who kind of put the whole question of Palestine on the map, actually, as part of the US agenda, so to speak. So yeah, I feel like there's a lot of positive things that are going on. But I always revert back to Diana Buttu, who's constantly reminds me that, these last 75 years have been so incredibly difficult for the Palestinians, both inside Palestine, by sure, much more, but also the ones in diaspora. But for our unity as Palestinians, we would never actually be where we are today, because we still exist despite the fact that they're trying to ethnically cleanse us, and that they're trying to actually, go for full erasure, and that Palestinians never actually even ever existed. So I'm thankful that we have people both inside and outside that are fighting so hard. And I'm so looking forward to Gen Z. Myself, I work with so many and train so many. I'm so looking forward to their very bold moves, that they'll be making soon too. But I still think, I don't know what you think, Dima, but I feel like we're in a make or break situation. If we don't get this done in the next 20 years or so, I think we might actually be erased off of the map.
Well, I guess I'm not that fatalistic. I think our people are resilient and smart, and I do think that we are there are new generations all over the place. We're seeing more and more Palestinians in the professional realms gaining influence, and I don't think that that's going to happen. I mean, you look at South Africa, and when you think it couldn't get worse, and when you don't imagine the apartheid regime ever falling, it fell, and that was not expected. And I don't know that will happen with Israel, but something has to give. And I think the tensions within Israeli society are, starting to tear apart that consensus, the consensus here around Israel, right? For the first time, you have, Jewish people calling for boycotts of Israel, right? I mean, Zionist Jews calling for boycotts of Israel, not for the same reasons, obviously, as we do. But the consensus is falling apart, and that's what we have to encourage. It is not okay to support an apartheid state. It is not okay to, pour billions and billions of dollars into a military that violates every possible international law in the books. This is something that we, as U.S. citizens, as citizens of the globe, have to continue to demand that our own governments do better. And I think there's definitely just globally this fascist, this reversion to fascism, and it's part of a trend, of a global trend, and I do think we will see things sway the other way eventually, and we have to keep that our momentum going despite the fascist repression that we're seeing today everywhere, really.
Yeah. Thank you, Dima. It's a pleasure having you with us on the show today. Very inspiring, and keep up the great work. And we're here to assist you and help you in all the work that you need.
Thanks so much, Lema and Nina. It's really great to see you and talk with you both.
Thank you. We hope to see you in person very soon, inshallah.
I hope so, inshallah.
Thank you for joining us this week on Free Palestine Pod. Subscribe, like, rate, and review wherever you listen to podcasts, and follow us on Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter.
And be sure to come back next week for a new episode of Free Palestine Pod. Let's talk Palestine.